The gunshot
Please
echoed
don't do
through the hallway
this!
like
Don't want
something
any
breaking
trouble.
inside the earth. Wren Dalton heard it before she understood it. A sound too sharp, too close, too wrong for a Thursday afternoon in a public high school. Her body recognized the danger before her mind caught up. Every lesson her father ever taught her about reading a room, about sensing when violence was about to unfold, fired at once. She turned from the entrance doors and saw him. Caleb Mercer, the quiet boy from her history class, the one who lived in his car and thought nobody knew, was sprinting across the parking lot toward her. His face was twisted with fear, mouth open, screaming her name. Behind him, 30 yards back, enclosing a figure in black, raised something long and dark against the gray skin. A rifle. Wren's legs locked, her breath stopped. The world narrowed to a corridor of pure terror, with Caleb running through the center of it and death walking calmly behind. Shots punched into concrete. Stone chips sprayed across her neck. She felt the sting, but not the pain. Then Caleb was there, crashing into her, pulling her through the hallway, and they were running together through fluorescent light that buzzed like any other day. A janitor's closet materialized beside them. He shoved her through the door and slammed it shut, his back against the door, his feet braced against a metal shelf. A bullet came through the gap between door and frame and hit him in the shoulder, and his shirt turned dark and heavy with red. Through the crack in the door, Wren saw an eye, bloodshot, empty, looking right at them. Then Caleb spoke to the eye, and his voice was gentle, and Wren understood that she was watching a boy with nothing give away the only thing he had left. But that moment was still 4 days away. 4 days earlier, Wren Dalton sat in the back row of Mr. Hargrove's American history class and watched the world like she always did, quietly, carefully. From a distance, that felt safe but never comfortable. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and institutional carpet. Mr. Hargrove was lecturing about the Dust Bowl, about families who lost everything and walked west with nothing but hope and desperation. Wren found the irony almost unbearable. This room was full of people carrying their own private dust storms, and nobody seemed to notice. She noticed. Wren Dalton was 17 years old, 5'6", with blonde hair darkened at the roots because she'd stopped bleaching it 3 months ago and couldn't find a reason to start again. A tattoo of wings climbed from her collarbone toward her jaw, the ink still sharp because her father's fur-beige friend had done it for her 16th birthday in the back room of a motorcycle shop, while 3 Hell's Angels stood guard at the door. She wore a leather jacket even when the building was warm. Not because she was cold, because armor was armor, and Wren had learned young that the world required it. Her father was Gunner Dalton, president of the Inland Empire chapter of the Hells Angels. A man who stood 6'4", weighed 250 pounds, had a gray beard that reached his chest and arms, covered in tattoos that told stories most people couldn't read. A man whose name made police officers straighten their posture and prosecutors reach for thicker files. Wren loved him completely. She also understood with a clarity that sometimes felt like grief that his name was a wall between her and every normal thing a 17-year-old girl was supposed to have. Friends, trust, a mother. Her mother had left when Wren was 9, packed a bag on a Tuesday morning while Wren was at school and Gunner was at the shop. Left a note on the kitchen counter that said 3 sentences, and Wren had memorized all of them, even though she wished she hadn't. The words lived in her chest like a splinter she couldn't reach. The leaving hadn't come from nowhere. 2 years before the note, Wren's older brother had died. Sawyer Dalton, 16 years old, riding his motorcycle on Route 18 when a pickup truck ran a red light. The truck driver walked away with a broken collarbone. Sawyer didn't walk away at all. The funeral had 300 bikers and one mother who stood at the back and stared at the casket like she was watching her own life lowered into the ground. 2 years later, she was gone. The weight of loving a man whose world took her son was more than she could carry. So Wren grew up in a house full of leather and engine grease and men who called her princess but couldn't teach her how to braid her own hair. She learned to read people the way her father read a room when he walked into a bar he'd never been to before. Exits first, threats second, allies third, everything else was noise. She applied that skill to Riverside High every single day. Not because she expected violence, because observation was the only thing that made her feel safe in a place where she didn't belong. And 3 weeks ago, her observation had locked onto 2 people. The first was Caleb Mercer. He sat in the back corner of American history, 3 rows behind her and 2 seats to the left. 17 years old with dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises, hair that needed cutting, clothes that rotated on a cycle so precise it was almost military. Gray shirt Monday, blue shirt with the frayed collar. Tuesday, black shirt so faded it looked purple Wednesday. Then back to gray. 3 shirts. Wren counted them the first week. By the second week, she understood what 3 shirts meant. Poverty didn't look like the movies. It didn't announce itself with torn clothes and visible ribs. It looked like precision. Like a boy who ironed his shirts in a gas station bathroom and timed his showers to the minute and never let a single crack show in the surface of his carefully constructed normal. She watched him at lunch. Every day he took his free cafeteria tray and walked straight past the tables, past the groups and cliques and social ecosystems he'd stopped trying to navigate, and carried his food out to the parking lot. She followed him once at a distance, watched him eat in his car, watched him tear pieces of meat from his sandwich and drop them on the pavement for a scrawny orange tabby cat that limped on its back leg and purred like a small engine when it ate. He was feeding the cat from his own lunch. A boy who couldn't afford a haircut was sharing food with a stray animal because compassion didn't consult a bank balance before it moved through you. She'd started watching the parking lot more carefully after that. Her father had taught her that if you wanted to know someone's story, you watched where they went when they thought nobody was looking. Caleb parked in a different spot every day. East lot Mondays, West lot Tuesdays, street parking Wednesdays, teacher's lot Thursdays, East again Fridays. Nobody rotated parking spots unless they were hiding something. On the third Tuesday, Wren stayed late after school, sat in her car in the far corner of the West lot, engine off, watching. At 9:45 at night, Caleb's Honda Civic pulled into a spot behind the old gymnasium. The headlights went off, the engine stayed silent, and Caleb Mercer reclined his seat and closed his eyes. He was living in his car. Wren sat in her own car for 20 minutes after that, gripping the steering wheel, breathing through something that felt too large for her chest. She recognized him. Not his face, not his name, but his condition. The careful invisibility. The way he moved through the school like a ghost who'd learned that being seen meant being questioned, and being questioned meant being discovered, and being discovered meant losing the only stability he had. She recognized it because she wore invisibility too. Different fabric, same purpose. Her leather jacket, his rotating parking spots. Her silence, his silence. 2 people hiding in plain sight for entirely different reasons, carrying entirely different weight, but occupying the same frequency of loneliness. She didn't tell anyone. Not her father, not a teacher, not a counselor. Because Wren understood something most people didn't. Sometimes the cruelest thing you could do to a person holding their life together with safety pins and willpower was to expose them to people who would call it a problem and assign it a caseworker. So she kept his secret, and she watched. Made sure he was eating, made sure he showed up to class, made sure the careful architecture of his survival stayed intact. That was the first person Wren's radar locked onto. The second was Nolan Pritchard. Nolan sat in Wren's second period, an elective called current events, that the school used to fill scheduling gaps. He was the kind of boy who used to take up space in a room. Loud laugh, broad shoulders, the remnants of an athlete's build going soft around the middle because he'd stopped working out. 3 months ago, Nolan Pritchard had friends and a girlfriend and a spot on the varsity football team and a future that made sense. Then everything collapsed. The collapse came in stages like a building being demolished floor by floor. First his parents, a divorce so ugly the details leaked into school gossip like sewage through a cracked foundation. His father moved out. His mother started drinking. Nolan came to school one Monday with a bruise on his jaw and told everyone he'd walked into a door, and everyone pretended to believe him because the alternative was uncomfortable. Second football. His grades dropped below the eligibility threshold, and Coach Brennan cut him from the team with a conversation that lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes to erase the only thing Nolan had that made him feel like he mattered. Third, his girlfriend. She left him for a junior named Travis and posted photos of them together on Instagram the same day. The comments section was a graveyard of laughing emojis. Fourth, the internet. Someone created a fake account using Nolan's name and photos and posted things that weren't true but spread like fire through dry grass. By the time the account was reported and removed, the damage was done. Nolan Pritchard went from being a person to being a punchline. Ren watched all of it happen. Watched the way his posture changed, shoulders curling inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. Watched the way his eyes went from angry to sad to something worse than both. Empty. Flat. Like someone had turned off all the circuits behind them and left just enough power to keep the body moving. Her father had a name for that look. He called it the dead man's stare. He'd seen it in prison in the faces of men who decided something terrible and found peace in the decision. The planning was done. The fear was gone. All that remained was the execution. Gunnar had taught Ren to recognize it because he said it was the most dangerous expression a human face could wear. A man in pain was unpredictable. A man in rage was dangerous. But a man with dead eyes had already crossed a line inside himself that most people didn't even know existed. He wasn't thinking about consequences anymore. He was thinking about logistics. Ren saw the dead man's stare on Nolan Pritchard's face for the first time on a Thursday 6 days before everything happened. He was sitting in current events while Mrs. Langford talked about a school shooting in another state. The irony would only become clear later. Nolan sat motionless, hands flat on his desk, staring at the whiteboard. Not taking notes, not fidgeting, not breathing in any rhythm Ren could detect. Just sitting there with those dead eyes, while the room discussed how to prevent the exact thing he was planning. After class, Ren walked behind Nolan in the hallway. She was close enough to see over his shoulder when he opened his notebook to check something. The page was covered in a hand-drawn diagram. Hallways, doors, exit routes, a building she recognized because she walked through it every day. Her blood went cold. She could have gone to a teacher, could have walked into the principal's office and said what she saw. But Ren Dalton had spent her entire life learning one brutal lesson about the relationship between people like her family and people in authority. They didn't listen. When she was 14, a man followed her home from school for 3 days in a row. Same car, same route, slowing down when she slowed down, stopping when she stopped. She told a police officer at a community event. The officer looked at her leather jacket, asked her last name, and when she said Dalton, his expression changed. He wrote nothing down, asked if maybe she was exaggerating, suggested that maybe the car was just going the same direction. Gunnar handled it himself. The man never followed anyone again. But the lesson branded itself into Ren's understanding of the world. When your last name was synonymous with a motorcycle club that law enforcement spent decades trying to dismantle, your credibility was worth less than the paper a police report was printed on. She couldn't report Nolan herself, not and be taken seriously. She needed someone else, someone clean, someone without a last name that triggered database flags and suspicious squints, someone who would actually be heard. She needed Caleb Mercer. The decision formed slowly over the weekend. Ren lay in her bed in the house she shared with Gunnar, in the room her father had painted lavender when she was 12 because she'd asked for purple, and he'd gotten the shade wrong, and she'd loved him too much to correct him. She stared at the ceiling and thought about what she knew and what she could prove, and what would happen if she was wrong, and what would happen if she was right and did nothing. Monday morning, she made her choice. She found Caleb in the parking lot at lunch. He was sitting in his Honda Civic eating a chicken sandwich from the cafeteria, tearing off small pieces and dropping them on the pavement for a scrawny orange tabby with a torn ear. Ren had seen the cat before. She'd named him in her head, Atlas, because he looked like he was carrying something too heavy for his small frame, and he kept walking anyway. She approached the car from the driver's side. Caleb saw her coming and his whole body tensed. She recognized the micro-expressions: fear of discovery, calculation of excuses, preparation of lies. She knocked on his window. He rolled it down 2 inches, just enough to hear her, not enough to invite conversation. "You're Caleb Wright from Hargrove's class." "Yeah." His voice was careful, measured, giving away nothing. "I'm Ren. I know who you are." Something in the way he said it, not hostile, not friendly, just aware. He knew her name the way she knew his, from a distance, through observation without ever closing the gap. "Can I sit?" He stared at her for a long moment. She could see the debate behind his eyes. Talking to people meant risk. Risk meant exposure. Exposure meant losing the careful balance of his invisible life. But he unlocked the passenger door. Ren climbed in. The car smelled like fast food and fabric softener, and something underneath both that was just the smell of a life lived in a small space with no ventilation. She didn't react, didn't wrinkle her nose, didn't let her eyes wander to the backpack stuffed with clothes in the back seat or the Ziploc bag with a toothbrush visible in the center console. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine. You look like you haven't slept." "I sleep fine." She let the lie sit between them. Didn't challenge it, didn't push. Her father always said that trust was like engine work. You couldn't force a bolt that wasn't ready to turn. You had to be patient, apply the right pressure, and know when to stop before you stripped the threads. "I wanted to give you something." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Black with silver lettering. Dalton's Customs, Motorcycle Repair. The Hells Angels Death Head logo in the corner. Her father's shop, her father's number. Her father's world condensed into a 3 by 2 inch rectangle of heavy cardstock. Caleb took it, looked at it. His eyebrows rose slightly at the logo. "Your dad's a Hell's Angel. President of the Inland Empire chapter." Caleb looked at her with new eyes. She could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about the quiet girl in the leather jacket who sat 3 rows ahead of him in history class. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because everybody needs someone they can call when things go wrong. And I've seen you, Caleb. I know you don't have anyone." His jaw tightened. There it was. The fear, the shame, the wall going up. "I don't know what you think you—" "I'm not going to tell anyone." Her voice was steady, calm. The voice her father used when he was making a promise he intended to keep with his life. "Your business is your business. I'm just saying, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call that number. Day or night." She opened the car door and stepped out before he could argue, before he could hand the card back, before the wall finished going up. "Why?" Caleb's voice followed her out, quiet, almost broken. Ren turned back, looked at him through the open door. A 17-year-old boy sitting in a car that was his home, his dining room, his bedroom, his entire world, holding a business card like he didn't know what to do with kindness. "Because you're one of the good ones," she said, "and there aren't enough of us left." She walked away before her voice could crack, before he could see that her hands were shaking. Because she hadn't just given him a business card, she'd chosen him to carry a burden he didn't know existed yet, and the weight of that choice pressed against her ribs like a fist. That afternoon, Ren sat in her car after school and called Gunnar. "Hey, Princess." "Hey, Daddy." "You okay? You sound off." She almost told him everything. Almost said, "There's a boy at my school drawing maps of the hallways, and his eyes are dead, and I think something terrible is coming." But Gunnar would handle it himself. He would show up at the school or send someone, and there would be leather vests and loud voices, and the situation would escalate in ways that might push Nolan from planning to action before anyone was ready. "I'm fine," she said, "just tired. Come by the shop after dinner. I'll teach you how to rebuild a carburetor. Take your mind off whatever's eating you." "Yeah, maybe." She hung up and sat in the parking lot watching students file out of the building. Normal kids living normal lives, complaining about homework, making plans for the weekend, existing in a world where the worst thing that could happen was a bad grade or a broken heart. Nolan Pritchard walked out alone, backpack hanging from one shoulder, head down. He crossed the lot to a silver Honda Accord, got in, and sat there. Didn't start the engine. Didn't look at his phone. Just sat behind the wheel staring at the school building through the windshield. Ren watched him for 23 minutes. She counted every one. During those 23 minutes, 3 students walked past Nolan's car. None of them noticed him. None of them glanced at the part sitting motionless behind the wheel, staring at the building where they spent 6 hours a day learning things they'd forget. Invisible. Just like Caleb. Just like Ren. 3 different kinds of invisible, and only one of them was building toward an explosion. Finally, Nolan started the engine and drove away. Slowly, deliberately, like the car was carrying something fragile, something that might detonate with too sudden a movement. That night, Ren didn't sleep. She lay in her lavender bedroom with the motorcycle posters on the walls and the framed photo of Sawyer on her nightstand, and she thought about dead eyes and building diagrams and the terrible arithmetic of doing nothing. 2 days passed, Tuesday and Wednesday, 2 days of watching Nolan in class, watching his stillness deepen, watching whatever was building behind those empty eyes grow heavier and closer to the surface. 2 days of watching Caleb in history class and knowing she'd planted a seed she couldn't unplant. On Wednesday at lunch, Ren saw Nolan's car in the parking lot again. Same spot as before, same posture behind the wheel, same dead stare aimed at the school. But this time he sat for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of motionless observation like a predator, studying the geometry of an attack, memorizing sightlines and distances, and the rhythm of doors opening and closing. Ren photographed his car from her own. Timestamp, license plate, location. She didn't know what she would do with the photos yet, but documentation was preparation, and preparation was the distance between being ready and being too late. That night, Wednesday night, Caleb Mercer was parked behind the old gym building, trying to finish his history homework by phone flashlight, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The night was cold enough to see his breath inside the car. He had the sleeping bag pulled up to his waist and a hoodie zipped to his chin. The Honda Civic's heater hadn't worked in 3 months, and the repair would cost $200 he didn't have. So Caleb had learned to live with cold the way he'd learned to live with everything else, by enduring it until his body forgot what warmth felt like. His mother had been dead for 8 months. Overdose, heroin. He'd found her on the bathroom floor when he came home from school, the needle still in her arm and her skin already the wrong color. The paramedics tried for 20 minutes and then stopped trying, and one of them looked at Caleb standing in the hallway and said something about calling family. And Caleb almost laughed because family was the woman on the floor and the brother who'd disappeared 2 years ago, and that was the entire list. The landlord changed the locks 11 days later. Caleb came home from school and his key didn't work, and his clothes were in garbage bags on the curb. He loaded what he could into the Civic and drove to a parking lot and sat there until he stopped shaking and started planning. 8 months ago, another life. He almost deleted the text, but Ren's voice was in his head, the way she'd looked at him in the parking lot, the business card still in his pocket, heavy with intention. The words that kept circling back, "You're one of the good ones." He opened the message. A photograph filled his screen, a car trunk open. Inside it, a long black rifle case and 3 boxes of ammunition. Below the photo, a message appeared, letter by letter, like the sender was typing slowly, choosing each word with care. "I'm sorry you have to see this. You were one of the good ones. Don't come to school tomorrow, please." Caleb's hands began to shake. The phone trembled in his grip, like a living thing trying to escape. He read the message twice, 3 times. The words blurred and sharpened and blurred again. He tried to call the number. Disconnected. Tried again. Nothing. A deadline from a person who was already speaking in past tense. You were one of the good ones. Were. Past tense. Like Caleb was already a memory. His thumb hovered over the emergency call button. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. What if he was wrong? What if this was someone's idea of a joke? What if he called the police and ruined a life over nothing? But then the pieces connected. Ren's face in the parking lot, her intensity. The card she'd given him that felt less like a gift and more like a preparation. And behind all of it, Nolan Pritchard's empty eyes staring through a windshield at a building full of people who had no idea they were being measured for coffins. Ren had seen it first. She tried to warn him without words, tried to position him where he needed to be. And now the proof had arrived on his phone at 12:47 in the morning, sent by a boy who was saying goodbye. Caleb pressed 911. The operator answered on the second ring. Calm, professional, trained for exactly this kind of call. 911, what's your emergency? Caleb's voice came out steadier than he expected. I'm a student at Riverside High School. I received a text message tonight from another student. It contains a photograph of weapons and what I believe is a threat to carry out a shooting at the school tomorrow. He told him everything. The text, the photo, Nolan's behavior over the past weeks, the way he'd been sitting in the parking lot staring at the building, the empty eyes, the dead man stare, though Caleb didn't have that phrase for it. He just said the boy looked like someone who'd already decided. 2 officers met him at the station within the hour. They took screenshots, asked questions, wrote everything down. How do you know this student? Has he made direct threats before? Do you have additional evidence? Caleb told them what he knew, what he'd observed, what his gut told him. One of the officers, an older man with gray at his temples and tired eyes, that had probably seen too many of these calls turn out to be nothing, and too many turn out to be everything, put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. You did the right thing, son. But Caleb didn't feel right. He felt like he'd pulled the pin on a grenade and couldn't tell if he'd thrown it far enough. He spent the rest of the night parked across from the police station, watching the front doors, unable to sleep. His phone battery dropped to 23%. His shoulder ached from the angle of the seat. His eyes burned. At 5:30, he gave up on sleep, drove to school early, parked in the teacher's lot, slipping in before anyone with a pass arrived. Watched the sun come up over the school, like it did every morning, orange and indifferent. At 7:15, a police car pulled into the lot. The school resource officer walked inside with the principal. Caleb watched from his car, fingers wrapped around the steering wheel, knuckles white. First period, American history. Mr. Hargrove talked about the New Deal and the CCC and young men who built roads and bridges in national parks because the country gave them a chance when everything else had fallen apart. Caleb heard the words through a wall of static. His eyes kept moving to Nolan's empty seat. At 8:47, the PA system crackled. Nolan Pritchard, please report to the main office. Nolan Pritchard to the main office. Whispers erupted like small fires across the classroom. What did he do? Is he in trouble? I haven't seen him in like a week. Caleb's stomach nodded. The seat stayed empty. Nolan wasn't in the building. Ren, sitting 3 rows ahead, turned her head just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough to find Caleb's eyes. The look she gave him lasted less than a second, but in that second, Caleb saw confirmation. She knew. She'd known before him. The business card, the conversation in the parking lot, the words about being one of the good ones. She'd been building a bridge to this exact moment, positioning him as the messenger, because she couldn't be the message. Second period crawled past. HV. AC theory for Caleb, current events for Ren. Both of them trapped in classrooms while the clock ticked towards something neither of them could see clearly, but both could feel in their bones. At lunch, Caleb took his tray and headed for the parking lot. His hands were trembling. The cafeteria pizza looked like cardboard and smelled like nothing. He was halfway across the lot when a voice stopped him. Caleb. He turned. Ren stood near the B-wing doors, leather jacket, open phone in one hand. Up close in full daylight, her tattoo was unmistakable. Wings spreading from her collarbone toward her jaw. Dark ink against pale skin. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they were looking at him with an intensity that made his chest tight. You okay? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. No, you're not, and that's okay. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. I know you called the cops last night. My dad's friend on the force mentioned a student phoned in a tip. Didn't give your name, but I put it together. How? Because you're the only person in this entire school who would actually pick up the phone and do something. Everyone else just posts about it and moves on. They stood in the parking lot surrounded by the ordinary sounds of a high school at midday. Car doors, music, laughter. All of it felt obscene to Caleb, like a party happening next to an open grave. Was I right to call? His voice cracked on the last word. What if I'm wrong? What if I just destroyed his life for nothing? Ren's expression shifted. Something softer moved behind her eyes. My dad always says trust your gut. Your gut was screaming, wasn't it? He nodded. Then you did the right thing. Caleb looked at her. Really looked. Past the leather jacket and the tattoo and the careful distance she kept between herself and every other human being in this school. He saw the same thing she'd seen in him 3 weeks ago. Someone hiding, someone watching, someone carrying a weight that would break most people and refusing to put it down. You knew, he said quietly. Before me, before the text. You saw what was happening with Nolan. Ren didn't deny it. I've been watching him for weeks. Why didn't you report it yourself? Her jaw tightened. A muscle flexed near her ear. My last name is Dalton. My father runs with hellsangels. When I tell authority figures things, they don't write it down. They write me down. Different list, different file, different set of assumptions about credibility. The bitterness in her voice was old, practiced, the kind that comes from years of learning the same lesson in different forms. So you used me, Caleb said, not angry, just understanding. I gave you a lifeline and hoped you'd use it. There's a difference. She paused. And I'd do it again. because that text proved I was right, and if you hadn't called, nobody would have. They stood there for another moment, two invisible people seeing each other clearly for the first time, and then the bell rang and they went back to their separate corners of a building that neither of them knew was running out of time. That afternoon, the school felt different, quieter maybe. Or maybe that was just Ren's imagination layering meaning onto ordinary silence. The police had been and gone. The resource officer had spoken with the principal. Nolan's seat remained empty across both classes. The system was doing what systems do: processing, evaluating, following protocol. Ren didn't trust protocol. Protocol was a checklist. Checklists missed the spaces between the boxes. After school, she sat in her car and opened Instagram on her phone. She'd been checking Nolan's account every few hours for the past week. The profile had been dormant for 21 days. No posts, no stories, no activity. At 3:47 in the afternoon, a new story appeared. Posted 4 minutes ago, Ren's finger hovered over the thumbnail. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She tapped. The video was shaky, filmed in what looked like a car. Nolan's face filled the screen and Ren's stomach dropped because he looked worse than she'd ever seen him. Eyes red and swollen, face drained of color, hands trembling as he held the phone. But the dead man's stare was gone, replaced by something worse: certainty. "I know someone called the cops." His voice was flat, stripped of emotion, like a man reading his own eulogy. "I know they're looking for me. I know they think they stopped something." He paused, looked away from the camera. When he looked back, his eyes had changed again. Not dead anymore. Alive with something final and terrible. They didn't. The video ended. Ren's phone was already dialing before the screen went dark. Not 911, not a teacher, not the resource officer who had already done his checklist and checked his boxes. Gunnar. The phone rang once. "Hey, princess." "Daddy, listen to me. The boy I told you about at school, the one I was worried about, he just posted a video online saying the police didn't stop him. He's still planning it. Tomorrow, maybe sooner. I need you to be ready." Silence on the other end, not the silence of a man processing. The silence of a man whose entire body had shifted into a different gear. Ren could hear it, the change in his breathing, the creak of leather as he stood up from wherever he'd been sitting. "Are you safe right now?" "I'm in the parking lot, about to drive home." "Come straight to the shop. Don't stop anywhere." "Dad, straight to the shop, Ren. I'll handle this." "You can't handle this the way you handle things. This isn't a bar fight. This is a kid with a rifle and nothing left to lose." Another silence. Longer this time. When Gunnar spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. The voice he used when he was telling the truth and wished he wasn't. "Then we make sure someone hears us this time." Ren drove to the shop, sat in the back office while Gunnar made phone calls. He called the police himself, gave them the Instagram video, demanded to know what they were doing. The officer he spoke with said they were aware of this situation. They had contacted Nolan's family. They were monitoring. They were following up. Following up. Two words that meant nothing and everything. Following up meant the system was still processing, still evaluating, still moving at the speed of bureaucracy while a boy with dead eyes and a rifle case was moving at the speed of desperation. Gunnar hung up and looked at his daughter. "They say they've got it handled. They don't. I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know they don't. What do we do? We wait. And if they're wrong, if tomorrow goes bad, I will burn this town to the ground getting to you." His eyes were wet. Ren had seen her father angry 1,000 times. She'd seen him violent, seen him gentle, seen him drunk and laughing and stone-cold sober in a courtroom. But she'd only seen him cry twice. Once at Sawyer's funeral. Once right now. "Come here," he said, and she crossed the room and let him wrap his arms around her. And for a moment, she wasn't a girl who'd been reading danger signals for weeks. She was just a daughter being upheld by her father, and the world outside was somebody else's problem. But the world doesn't stay outside. That night, Ren lay in bed with her phone on her chest, refreshing Nolan's Instagram every 15 minutes. The story had been taken down either by Nolan or by the platform. It didn't matter. The words were carved into her memory. "They didn't stop me. They didn't." She texted Caleb at 11:30. She'd gotten his number from a classmate who thought she was asking about homework. "You see Nolan's story? Three dots appeared almost immediately. He was awake too. Yeah, called 911 again. They said officers are on their way to his house. Ren stared at the screen. Officers on their way. Another step in the checklist. Another box to check. She wanted to believe it would be enough. Wanted to trust the system the way people who'd never been failed by it could trust it. She texted back, "Be careful tomorrow. Park close to an exit. Have your keys in your hand when you walk through the lot." Long pause. "That you think it's actually going to happen." Ren typed and erased 3 different responses. "Settled on the truth. I think we did everything we could, but I also think some things don't stop because you asked them to." Caleb's response came 30 seconds later. "I'll be there. I'm not going to hide." Something in those words hit Ren square in the chest. The quiet defiance of a sortie who had nothing and still showed up every day. Who slept in a car and brushed his teeth in a fast food bathroom and fed a stray cat his lunch meat and was planning to walk into a building that might become a war zone because hiding wasn't something he knew how to do. She set her phone down, stared at the ceiling. Sawyer's photo watched her from the nightstand. Her brother, forever 16, forever frozen in a moment before the red light in the pickup truck. She used to talk to the photo when she was younger. Tell him about her day, ask him questions, pretend the silence that followed was an answer. Tonight she didn't talk to him. She just looked at his face and thought about the distance between the people who run toward danger and the people who run away, and how that distance was measured not in feet but in something deeper, something that lived in the marrow. Thursday morning arrived cold and bright. November sun cutting through thin clouds. Ren dressed carefully. Leather jacket, boots with good traction, hair tied back and out of her face. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and saw her father's eyes looking back. Pale blue, almost gray. The eyes of a man who'd survived things that would have broken most people transplanted into the face of a girl who was beginning to understand that survival was hereditary. She ate breakfast standing at the kitchen counter. Toast with peanut butter, black coffee, same as Gunnar drank it. The house was quiet. Gunnar had left for the shop before dawn the way he always did. But this morning his coffee mug was still warm on the counter, and beside it was a note in his heavy handwriting. "Be safe today. I love you. Call me for any reason or no reason." Ren folded the note and put it in her jacket pocket next to her phone and her keys. 3 objects. 3 lifelines. She walked out the door and pulled it shut behind her and stood on the porch for a moment, breathing the cold November air, and thought about all the people who would walk into Riverside High today without knowing what she knew. She drove to school with her phone in her lap, volume turned all the way up. Gunnar had texted at 6:15. "I'm at the shop, 10 minutes from the school. You call, I come." No hesitation. The parking lot was filling up. Normal morning case. Buses, cars, students walking in groups, backpacks slung over shoulders. The school resource officer's car was parked near the front entrance. Ren noted its position. Also noted that it was 1 car, 1 officer in a building with 6 entrances and 1,400 students. She parked near the B-wing entrance, close to a door just like she told Caleb. Keys stayed in her jacket pocket, not in her bag. Ready. First period. Mr. Hargrove's American History. Ren sat in her usual seat and felt the room like a living thing around her. 30 students, 1 teacher, 1 door, windows that didn't open far enough to climb through. She calculated the distance from her seat to the exit. 14 feet. She could cover it in 3 seconds. Caleb was in his corner. Their eyes met briefly. He looked exhausted, hollow. She could see the phone in his hand under the desk, screen angled where only he could see it. Mr. Hargrove was talking about the Tennessee Valley Authority, building dams, harnessing rivers, turning destruction into power. Ren heard none of it. She was listening for something else. Something underneath the ordinary sounds. A door opening too fast. Footsteps with a wrong rhythm. The absence of sound that comes right before everything changes. The PA system crackled. "Nolan Pritchard, please report to the main office." Nolan Pritchard. His seat was empty, had been empty all morning. The whispers started. Ren's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it under her desk. "Gunnar, any sign of him? Ren, seat empty. Cops called him to office, but he's not here. Gunnar, stay close to exits. I mean it." Second period came and went. Then third. Each hour stretched longer than the last. Each minute filled with a tension only two people in the entire school could feel. Caleb and Wren, two invisible sentinels watching for a storm that might never come or might already be on its way. Lunch period, 12:35. Wren grabbed her bag and headed for the B-wing exit. She needed air, needed to step outside and breathe and call Gunner and hear his voice tell her she was safe even if she wasn't sure she believed it. She pushed through the double doors into the November cold, pulled out her phone, started to dial. That was when she saw the car. Silver Honda Accord, pulling slowly into the far end of the parking lot, engine barely audible. Moving with the careful deliberation of something that had rehearsed this approach a dozen times. Wren's thumb froze over the call button. The car pulled into a spot near the B-wing entrance. 50 yards from where she stood, the engine died. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Just the car sitting there and Wren standing at the doors and the space between them filling with something electric and lethal. The driver's door opened. Nolan Pritchard stepped out, all black, oversized jacket wrong for the warm weather. His right hand was hidden inside the jacket, pressed against his body, holding something that made the fabric hang at an angle that didn't match gravity. Their eyes met across the parking lot. 50 yards of asphalt and painted lines in the ordinary machinery of a high school afternoon. Nolan's expression didn't change. His dead eyes found her and registered nothing. No recognition, no hesitation, no mercy. She wasn't a person to him anymore. She was geometry, a shape in a space he'd already calculated. His hand came out of the jacket. The rifle was black and longer than she expected, and Nolan was raising it toward the entrance toward her, and Wren's body was screaming at her to move, to run, to get back through those doors. But her legs had turned to concrete, and her father's voice was in her head saying, "Run, princess, run." But she couldn't because fear had locked every joint in her body. From across the parking lot, a car door flew open. Caleb Mercer was running, not away from the building, not toward safety, toward her, sprinting across the pavement with his arms pumping and his face twisted with terror, screaming her name in a voice that didn't sound human, that sounded like something being torn apart. Wren. The first shot shattered the morning. Sharp, loud, a sound that physically hurt, that ruptured something in the air between them. Concrete exploded near the entrance. Chips of stone sprayed across the doors. Wren dropped. Instinct, not thought. She hit the ground hard and began crawling toward the concrete planter near the entrance. Behind her, she heard the second shot, inside the building this time. Nolan was moving, walking with terrible purpose toward the entrance. Caleb was still running toward her, toward the danger, toward something that made no sense unless you understood that some people are wired differently, that some people run toward the fire because they cannot, in the deepest part of themselves, leave someone behind. And Wren, lying on the cold pavement with her heart exploding in her chest, understood two things at once. First, that the boy who had nothing was about to give everything. And second, that she had put him here. She had chosen him, positioned him, made him the messenger, the witness, the person who cared enough to call and brave enough to show up. And now he was sprinting toward a rifle because she was in its path, and the weight of that choice was the heaviest thing she had ever carried. Heavier than her mother's absence. Heavier than Sawyer's death. Heavier than a last name that closed every door before she could knock. Caleb reached her as the third shot punched into the wall above their heads. He grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, and they were running together now, crashing through the side entrance, into the hallway, into the building that had suddenly become the most dangerous place on earth. Behind them, Nolan walked through the doors they'd just entered, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they did every day, like this was just another Thursday, like the world wasn't ending one gunshot at a time. Wren ran, Caleb ran beside her, and somewhere behind them, getting closer with every measured step, the dead man's stare followed them into the hallway. The story of what happened next would be told 1,000 times, on news broadcasts and social media posts, and in the hushed voices of people who weren't there but felt like they were. They would call Caleb a hero. They would call it a miracle. They would analyze the footage from a classroom camera and measure the distance between the exit door and the closet door and marvel at the fact that a 17-year-old boy chose the longer path. But Wren would know the truth that no camera captured and no news report could explain. She had started this. She had seen the danger first had positioned, the pieces had set the chain of events in motion. And when the moment came when all her planning and calculation and careful observation collided with the raw chaos of a boy with a gun, it was someone else who paid the price in blood. Someone who had nothing. Someone who gave everything. And Ren Dalton, the invisible girl, the biker's daughter, the one who watched and planned and never let anyone close enough to matter and was about to learn what it meant to owe a debt that could never be repaid. But first, she had to survive the hallway. Time did something it wasn't supposed to do. It stretched. Each second became a room Ren could walk through, examining every detail with the terrible clarity of a person who understands that memory is about to become evidence. She was on the ground near the B-wing entrance, concrete cold against her palms, chips of stone in her hair from where the first bullet had hit the wall. Her phone was still in her right hand, gunner's number still glowing on the screen, the call never completed. Across the parking lot, Caleb Mercer was running toward her. Behind Caleb, walking with the mechanical precision of a wind-up toy that had been wound too tight for too long, Nolan Pritchard advanced with the rifle held against his shoulder. His face was blank. Not angry, not sad, not anything. The dead man's stare had reached its final form. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a trajectory, a direction, a bullet that happened to have legs. Caleb screamed her name again. The sound was raw, shredded, the voice of a boy who was running out of air and out of time and knew it and kept running anyway. His sneakers slapped the pavement in a rhythm that didn't match his heartbeat. Nothing matched. The world was full of sounds that shouldn't exist. The echo of the first shot still ringing off the brick walls. A car alarm triggered by the concussion. Somewhere inside the building, a girl screaming. Ren pushed herself to her knees. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else. She grabbed the door handle of the B-wing entrance and pulled herself upright. The glass door was still intact, still swinging on its hinges from when she'd burst through it moments ago. She yanked it open. Caleb reached her. He grabbed her arm with both hands and pulled her through the doorway. They crashed into the hallway together, feet sliding on the waxed tile floor's shoulders, hitting lockers. The door swung shut behind them, and for 1/2 second, the building felt safe. Walls, ceiling, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a normal day. Then the door opened again. Nolan walked through it like he was walking into a classroom. No rush, no urgency. The rifle swept left, then right, then left again. Systematic. Practiced. Like he'd rehearsed this in his mind 100 times until the movements were as natural as breathing. The hallway was not empty. A sophomore named something Ren didn't know was frozen by the water fountain backpack half off her shoulders, mouth open in a scream that produced no sound. A teacher she recognized but couldn't name was 20 feet ahead, turning the corner with a stack of papers that scattered from his arms like frightened birds when he saw the rifle. The second shot fired inside the building. The sound was different in here, louder, sharper. It multiplied off the concrete walls and the metal lockers and the tile floor until it felt like it came from everywhere at once. The sophomore by the water fountain dropped. Ren didn't see where she was hit. Didn't see if she was hit. Just saw her drop and stay down. Caleb pulled Ren forward. They ran. The hallway stretched out in front of them, impossibly long, the fluorescent lights creating a tunnel of white that seemed to go on forever. Their footsteps echoed. Behind them, Nolan's footsteps echoed too, slower, steady, the rhythm of a man who knew where everyone was going and had calculated exactly how long it would take to get there. Third shot, the teacher with the scattered papers. He was trying to open a classroom door, his hands shaking too badly to grip the handle, and the bullet caught the wall 6 inches from his head. Plaster exploded. He fell sideways through the door that finally opened and disappeared. Students were pouring out of classrooms now, some running toward the exits, some running deeper into the building, some not running at all because their bodies had chosen the third option that nobody talks about. Not fight, not flight, freeze. Standing perfectly still in the hallway, away like deer caught in headlights that were actually muzzle flashes. Ren's mind was racing at a speed her body couldn't match. She needed to think. Her father had taught her about this, about the way violence creates a cascade of bad decisions because fear shuts down the prefrontal cortex and leaves you operating on pure animal instinct. The trick was to find one clear thought and hold on to it like a rope in a flood. One clear thought, get off the hallway. Every second they stayed in this corridor, they were targets. Long, straight, nowhere to hide. Nolan was behind them, maybe 40 feet back, and the hallway was his shooting gallery. They needed to get out of the line of fire. Not out of the building, not yet. Just out of this hallway. She saw it. Janitor's closet, left side of the corridor, 15 feet ahead. Door slightly ajar. The same closet where the maintenance crew stored their mops and floor wax and industrial cleaner. Small, windowless, a dead end. A dead end was also a position, a defensible position. One door, one entry point, better than a hallway with sight lines that went on for 60 yards. Ren grabbed Caleb's wrist and pulled him toward the closet. He understood immediately. Changed direction. They covered the 15 feet in a burst of speed that felt like flying and falling at the same time. Caleb reached the door first. He grabbed the handle, wrenched it open, and shoved Ren through. She stumbled into darkness, hit a shelf full of cleaning supplies, and spun around in time to see Caleb standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the fluorescent hallway, one hand on the frame. He wasn't coming in. He was looking back down the hallway at Nolan, and there was something on his face that Ren had never seen before. Not fear, not rage, something older than both. Something that looked like resignation and defiance welded together into an expression that said, "I know what happens next, and I'm choosing it anyway." Caleb stepped into the closet, slammed the door, put his back against it, braced his feet against the metal shelving unit across the narrow space. His body became the lock, his spine became the bolt, and the door became the only thing between them and the hallway. The fourth shot came through the door, not through the wood, through the gap, the narrow space between the door and the frame where daylight leaked in from the hallway. The bullet entered at an angle and hit Caleb in the left shoulder, punching through fabric and skin and muscle, and out the other side in a spray of red that hit the wall behind them like thrown paint. Caleb's body jerked. His face went white. He looked down at his shoulder and saw the blood spreading across his gray shirt, the one with the small bleach stain near the bottom. The shirt he'd been wearing when he brushed his teeth in a McDonald's bathroom 30 hours ago in a life that no longer existed. He didn't fall, didn't scream. His feet stayed braced against the shelving unit, and his back stayed against the door, and his jaw clenched so hard Ren could hear his teeth grinding. "Oh God." The words came out of Ren before she could stop them. "Oh God, oh God." "Quiet." Caleb's voice was a whisper, strained, thin. "Please, quiet." She clamped both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were so wide they hurt. She could see everything in the near darkness. The blood running down Caleb's arm. The sweat beading on his forehead. The way his legs were trembling from the effort of holding the door against whatever was on the other side. The door handle rattled. Caleb felt it through his entire body. Someone pushing, testing. The door moved an inch inward. Caleb pushed back. His feet slid on the tile. The shelving unit scraped backward. The door opened a crack. Through the crack, an eye. Nolan's eye. Bloodshot. Dilated. Empty of everything that made a person a person. It looked at Caleb, looked through him, looked at the blood on his shirt and the girl behind him in the small dark space where two people were hiding from the end of the world. The rifle barrel slid through the crack. Black metal, cold, 6 inches from Caleb's face. Close enough to see the rifling inside the barrel. Close enough to smell the gunpowder from the shots already fired. Close enough that Caleb could have reached out and touched it, could have wrapped his good hand around it and pushed it away. But pushing a loaded rifle was not something his body was willing to do. This was it. This was the moment. The janitor's closet with the mops and the bleach and the industrial cleaner. This was where Caleb Mercer was going to die. 17 years old, no home, no family. 8 months of sleeping in a car and brushing his teeth in gas station bathrooms and feeding a stray cat named Atlas. All of it ending here in a space that smelled like floor wax and blood. He looked at the barrel, looked past it at the eye behind it, and instead of begging, instead of crying, instead of any of the things a person is supposed to do when a gun is pointed at their face, Caleb spoke. Nolan. The name hung in the air between them. Personal, specific, not shooter, not monster. A name. A boy's name. The name his mother gave him before everything went wrong. "Nolan, I see you." The rifle didn't move. The eye behind it blinked once. "I know you're in pain. I know you feel invisible. I know what it's like when nobody hears you screaming." Caleb's voice was fading. The blood loss was pulling him under like a current. His vision was going gray at the edges, but the words kept coming from somewhere deeper than consciousness. I called the cops last night, not because I wanted to get you in trouble, because I didn't want you to because I didn't want this. The eye blinked again. The rifle barrel trembled. Microscopic movement. Uncertainty measured in millimeters. Behind Caleb, pressed against the back wall of the closet, Ren Dalton was doing three things at once. The first thing was breathing. Controlled. Deliberate. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way Gunnar taught her to breathe when fear tried to take over. Fear was a chemical reaction. Adrenaline flooding the bloodstream, cortisol shutting down rational thought. You couldn't stop the chemicals, but you could manage the breathing, and the breathing could slow the heart rate, and the slower heart rate could buy you back just enough cognitive function to think. The second thing was her phone. She'd kept it in her hand through everything, the fall, the run, the closet. Now, in the darkness behind Caleb's bleeding body, she pressed the screen to her chest to hide the glow and dialed the only number that mattered. Not 911. She'd watched the system fail twice in 2 days. The calls, the protocols, the resource officer with his one car and his checklist. None of it had stopped this. None of it had been enough. She called Gunnar. He answered before the first ring finished. Ren, his voice was already moving. She could hear his boots on concrete, the jingle of keys, a door slamming. He already knew. Maybe he'd heard from a scanner, maybe from a news alert, maybe from the same instinct that let him read a room before he stepped inside. She couldn't speak above a whisper. Caleb was 6 inches in front of her, talking to a rifle barrel, and Nolan was on the other side of the door, and any sound could tip the balance. We're in the B-wing janitor's closet, she breathed. Caleb's been shot. He's holding the door. The shooter is right outside. I'm coming. Daddy. The word came out small, younger than 17. The word of a girl who'd lost her brother and her mother and was watching a boy bleed out against a door he was too stubborn to stop guarding. He's dying, he's bleeding, and he won't let go of the door. Listen to me. Gunnar's voice went steel hard and absolutely calm. You keep that boy alive until I get there. Pressure on the wound. Both hands. Push hard enough that it hurts him. You hear me? Yes. I'm 10 minutes away. Police are already there. Hold on. Just hold on. The line stayed open. She could hear the motorcycle engine roar to life. Could hear the wind against the phone as Gunnar tore out of the parking lot at the speed of a father who was done waiting for systems that couldn't protect his daughter. The third thing Ren was doing was searching the closet. Her free hand moved across the shelves in the darkness, past bottles of cleaner, past rolls of paper towels, past a bucket and a mop handle and a box of trash bags. Her fingers closed around cold metal, cylindrical, heavy, fire extinguisher. She pulled it off the shelf silently, tested the weight, 10 pounds, maybe 12. Metal casing. If that door opened, if Caleb's legs gave out, if the rifle came all the way through, she was going to swing it at Nolan's head with everything she had. Not because she was brave, because the alternative was watching two people die in a closet, and Ren Dalton had already watched one person she loved get lowered into the ground, and she was not going to do it again. Caleb was still talking. His voice was a thread now, thin and fraying. Doesn't have to end like this. Sirens, distant but real, getting closer. The wail of police cars approaching from multiple directions. Finally, too late for the people already hurt. But maybe not too late for the two people in the closet and the one person on the other side of the door who still had a choice. The eye visible through the crack in the door changed. Something moved behind it. Not the dead man's stare anymore. Something liquid and broken. Something that looked like a boy waking up from a dream and finding himself in a nightmare he'd built with his own hands. Nolan's voice came through the crack. Small, wrecked, nothing like the flat monotone from the Instagram video. I can't stop. You can, Caleb whispered. You just did. You stopped right here. The siren screamed closer, a block away, maybe less, tires screeching, doors slamming, commands being shouted through megaphones. The rifle pulled back through the crack. The eye disappeared. Footsteps. Running, getting quieter, moving away from them down the hallway toward the other end of the building. Caleb didn't move. Couldn't. His body had locked into position against the door muscles, cramped and trembling, blood pooling beneath him on the tile. His eyes were half closed. His breathing had gone shallow and fast. Ren dropped the fire extinguisher and moved to him instantly. She pushed herself between his body and the door, taking over the barrier position, freeing his back from the weight he'd been holding. He sagged forward. She caught him with both arms and lowered him to the floor. The blood was worse than she'd expected. His entire left side wall soaked. The gray shirt was black with it. She could see the entry wound through the torn fabric, a dark hole in the meat of his shoulder that pulsed with each heartbeat, pushing fresh red with every contraction. She stripped off her leather jacket, balled it up, pressed it against the wound with both hands, leaning her full weight into it. Caleb's eyes flew open, and he made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, a grinding, guttural noise that came from somewhere below language. "Look at me." Ren's voice was her father's voice now. Command, authority, the voice you used when someone was slipping away and you needed to give them something to hold on to. "Caleb, look at me. Open your eyes and look at me right now." His eyes found hers, brown meeting brown in the near darkness of a janitor's closet that smelled like bleach and blood. "You don't get to close your eyes. You hear me? You don't get to quit." "Hurts." One word, all he could manage. "I know it hurts. It's supposed to hurt. Hurting means you're alive. Keep hurting." She pressed harder. He groaned. Blood seeped between her fingers, hot and slick. The leather jacket was already saturated. She could feel his heartbeat through the wound, fast and thready, a bird beating its wings against a window it couldn't break. "Why did you run toward me?" she asked, not because she needed the answer, because she needed him talking, needed his brain engaged, needed him fighting to stay conscious. Exit was right there. His voice was a whisper now. 10 feet. "I know, so why? Couldn't leave you." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." A single gunshot echoed from the far end of the building, distant, muffled by walls and doors and the geometry of a school that had been designed for learning and was being used for dying. Then silence. Complete. Total. The kind of silence that follows the last note of a song nobody wanted to hear. Ren knew what that shot meant. She'd heard enough about these things from the news, from her father's friends who'd served in the military, from the grim calculus of American violence. The final shot was always the same. It was over. She kept her hands on Caleb's shoulder, kept the pressure, kept her eyes locked on his. His pupils were dilating unevenly, one larger than the other. Shock. His body was shutting down non-essential systems, rerouting blood to his core, sacrificing his extremities to keep his heart and lungs and brain alive for a few more minutes. Boots. Heavy. Running. Getting closer. The staccato rhythm of tactical teams clearing hallways, checking doors, sweeping corners. Voices sharp with training and adrenaline. "Clear left. Clear right." Moving to B-Wing. The closet door exploded inward. Ren threw herself over Caleb's body, shielding him. Light flooded in, blinding after the darkness. Men in black uniforms with helmets and shields and rifles that looked nothing like Nolan's, because these were pointed at the ground and attached to people whose eyes were alive. Ren raised her hands, both of them, red from wrist to fingertip. "He's shot." Her voice came out steady, calm. The voice of a girl who'd been screaming inside for 15 minutes and hadn't let a single scream reach her lips. "He's not the shooter. He saved me. He needs a medic now." Hands in tactical gloves reached for Caleb. He tried to raise his hands. Only his right one moved. His left arm was dead weight, the shoulder destroyed, the muscles severed or seized. GSW to the left shoulder. Significant blood loss. He's been down approximately 12 minutes. More hands, a medical kit appearing from somewhere. A woman in EMT gear kneeling beside Caleb, cutting away his shirt with trauma shears, exposing the wound to the light. The entry wound was clean, small, almost surgical. The exit wound on the back of his shoulder was larger, uglier, a ragged hole that spoke to the violence of the bullet's passage through his body. "Caleb?" The EMT's voice was calm and practiced. "Can you tell me your name?" "Caleb or Caleb Mercer." "Good. Do you know where you are?" "Janitor's closet, Riverside High." "Good, you're doing great. We're going to get you out of here." They loaded him onto a stretcher. Ren walked beside it, one hand on the rail, refusing to let go. They moved through the hallway, and it was nothing like the hallway she'd run through 15 minutes ago. The fluorescent lights were the same. The lockers were the same. The tile floor was the same. But everything was wrong. Backpacks scattered like debris. A shoe just one sitting in the middle of the corridor. Papers everywhere. A cell phone on the ground screen cracked, but still lit a text message visible that said, "Mom, you hear someone is shooting." Ren looked away, looked at Caleb instead. At his face pale and drawn, his eyes fighting to stay open, his good hand gripping the stretcher rail like it was the edge of a cliff. The ambulance was waiting outside. The parking lot had transformed. Police cars everywhere, lights spinning red and blue. Ambulances lined up. Parents already arriving, running toward the police tape, screaming names. The news vans were there too, cameras pointed at the building, reporters speaking into microphones with practiced expressions of concern. They loaded Caleb into the ambulance. Ren climbed in after him before anyone could stop her. "Miss, you need to." "I'm not leaving him. He has nobody else." The EMT looked at her blood-covered hands and her face, and whatever she saw there made her stop arguing. The doors closed. The siren started, and the ambulance pulled away from Riverside High School, and Ren sat beside Caleb and held his hand and watched the monitors and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, just like Gunnar taught her. Mercy General Hospital was organized chaos. Ren had never been inside an emergency room before, and the reality was nothing like television. It was fluorescent lights and linoleum floors, and the smell of disinfectant barely covering something organic and desperate. People in scrubs moved with controlled urgency, not running but walking fast. Their faces set in expressions of professional focus that masked whatever they were feeling underneath. They took Caleb through double doors that Ren wasn't allowed to follow through. She stood on the wrong side and watched the stretcher disappear around a corner and felt his hands slide out of hers and almost collapsed right there on the waiting room floor. A nurse appeared, young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and a name tag that said Beckett. She guided Ren to a chair and brought her water in a paper cup and a warm blanket that smelled like industrial laundry detergent. "Is there someone I can call for you?" "My dad, he's on his way." "Your friend, the boy they brought in, is he family?" Ren looked at her blood-stained hands, at the leather jacket she'd used as a bandage, now sitting in a clear plastic evidence bag that someone had sealed and labeled. At the phone in her lap, with Gunnar's call still active, 16 minutes and counting, the connection still open, even though neither of them had spoken in the last 5. "Yes," she said, "he's family." Gunnar arrived 23 minutes after the ambulance. Ren heard him before she saw him. The sound of heavy boots on linoleum moving fast, in a voice that made hospital security officers step aside without being asked. He came around the corner, and she stood up, and he crossed the space between them in 4 strides and picked her up off the ground in a hug that cracked something open inside her chest. She cried then, hard, the kind of crying that comes from a place below the ribs that shakes the whole body, that doesn't stop when you want it to. "I've got you," Gunnar said into her hair. "I've got you, princess. You're safe." "He saved me." The words came out broken. "He ran toward me, Daddy. The exit was right there, and he ran toward me instead, and he got shot, and he's in surgery, and he doesn't have anyone." Gunnar set her down but didn't let go. His hands stayed on her shoulders. His pale blue eyes searched her face with an intensity that reminded Ren of the way he looked at engines. Methodical, thorough, checking every component for damage. "Are you hurt?" "No, the blood is his." He looked at her hands, at her clothes, at the absence of her leather jacket. He nodded once, a slow dip of his massive head that contained more emotion than most people could express with their entire bodies. "Tell me everything." She did, from the beginning. Not from 4 days ago, but from 3 weeks ago, when she first noticed Caleb sleeping in his car. From the dead man's stare she'd seen on Nolan's face. From the decision to approach Caleb, to give him the card, to position him as the messenger. From the 911 call and the failed police response and the Instagram video and the morning that went wrong in every way except the one that mattered most. She told Gunnar all of it sitting in a hospital waiting room while a boy who'd lived in a Honda Civic for 8 months fought for his life on an operating table somewhere beyond the double doors. When she finished, Gunnar was quiet for a long time. His hands were on his knees. His jaw was working beneath his beard. She could see the muscles clenching and releasing, the physical manifestation of a man processing something that didn't fit into any category his experience had prepared him for. This boy, he said finally, this Caleb, he has no one, no parents. His mom died of an overdose 8 months ago. He has a brother somewhere, but they're not in contact. He's been living in his car since his mom died. He parks in the school lot. He eats his free lunch in his car. He feeds a stray cat. And today he took a bullet for me because he said he couldn't leave me. Gunnar stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot where news vans were multiplying and police cars were parked at angles and parents were hugging children who'd been escorted out of the building. He stood there for 3 full minutes without speaking. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. Sawyer, he said. Just the name, his son's name. The boy who had died on Route 18 10 years ago. Wren understood. Isham. She'd known he would see it. A boy with no protection, no safety net, no one standing between him and the worst the world could throw at him. The kind of boy Gunnar hadn't been able to save 10 years ago. The kind of boy who reminded a father of everything he'd lost and everything he'd failed to prevent. Daddy, Wren said carefully, when they discharge him, they're going to need an address. They're going to need a family member. Someone to take responsibility. I know where you're going with this. He saved my life. He has nothing, no home, no family, no one waiting for him. He's going to wake up in a hospital bed with a hole in his shoulder and nowhere to go. Gunnar looked at her, his pale eyes steady, measuring. You're asking me to take custody of a 17-year-old boy I've never met. I'm asking you to be the person you taught me to be. You told me our people take care of their own. You told me brotherhood means showing up when it matters. That boy showed up for me today. He showed up with nothing and gave everything. If that doesn't make him one of ours, then the patches and the vests and the brotherhood are just words. The silence that followed was the longest of Wren's life. She watched her father's face, watched the war behind his eyes, watched the man who ran a motorcycle club, and the man who'd buried a son, and the man who'd lost a wife, and the father who'd raised a daughter alone, all converge on a single decision. Gunnar pulled out his phone. Sullivan, he said when the line connected. It's Gunnar. I need you at Mercy General Hospital with emergency guardianship papers. A pause. Yeah, the shooting. My daughter's okay, but the kid who saved her has nobody. 17 years old, no parents, no home. I'm taking custody. Another pause longer. I don't care what you have to do. Make it happen. I'll pay whatever it says. He hung up and looked at Wren. Happy, Wren crossed the room and hugged him again. Harder this time. Her arms barely reaching around his massive frame. Her face pressed into his leather vest that smelled like engine oil and road dust, and the particular scent of a man who decided to do the right thing because his daughter asked him to. Thank you, Daddy. Don't thank me yet. That boy doesn't know what he's getting into. Sunday dinners alone are a commitment. 6 hours. That's how long Caleb was in surgery. 6 hours of Wren sitting in the waiting room, refusing to leave, refusing to eat, refusing to do anything except stare at the double doors and wait for someone to come through them with news. The waiting room filled and emptied and filled again around her. Parents arriving in waves, some crying, some silent, some angry, in the particular way that people get angry when fear has nowhere else to go. Students in groups huddled together, staring at their phones, sharing information that was half true and half panic. Teachers with their professional composure cracking at the edges, holding it together for the students while their own hands shook. A woman sat down next to Wren at one point, mid-40s, business clothes, mascara tracks on her cheeks. She asked Wren if she was okay. Wren said yes. The woman looked at the blood on Wren's hands and said nothing else. Just sat there for 20 minutes, sharing the silence, then stood and walked away when a nurse called a name that made her face collapse. 3 people dead. Wren kept hearing the number, whispered in the waiting room, displayed on the television mounted in the corner, where a news anchor with perfect hair and a somber expression repeated the same facts in slightly different arrangements. 2 students, 1 teacher, 7 injured. The shooter deceased by his own hand. The school in lockdown for 4 hours. The community in shock. The number should have been higher, would have been higher, if Caleb hadn't called 911 the night before. if the police response, however slow, hadn't put some pressure on Nolan's timeline. If a boy in a janitor's closet hadn't talked to a rifle barrel like it was a person instead of a weapon, the number should have been 5, or 10, or 20. Instead, it was 3, and 3 was a tragedy and a miracle at the same time, and Wren did not know how to hold both of those things in the same thought. Gunner stayed for the first 2 hours, then left to make calls. He was planning something. Wren could see it in the way his jaw was set, in the deliberate way he spoke on the phone, in the list he was making in a small notebook he carried in his vest pocket. He didn't tell her what he was planning. He just kissed her forehead and said he'd be back, and walked out into the parking lot where 3 other bikers were waiting on their motorcycles like sentinels. At the 4-hour mark, a nurse told Wren the surgery was going well. The bullet had passed through the shoulder cleanly, missed the subclavian artery by less than an inch, missed the bone entirely. Significant muscle damage, but repairable. He would keep the arm. He would recover. At the 5-hour mark, Wren's phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. The video was everywhere now, not Nolan's video, a different one, filmed by a student from inside a second-floor classroom window. The footage showed the parking lot, the B-wing entrance, and 2 figures. One running, one standing frozen at the doors. The quality was poor, shaky, shot through glass, but the story it told was unmistakable. You could see Caleb's car door fly open, see him sprint across the parking lot toward Wren, see him reach her just as the second shot fired, see him tackle her through the side entrance. The video cut off there, but it didn't need to show more. The 23 seconds of footage told the entire story. Caleb Mercer running toward danger, running toward a girl he barely knew, running away from the exit that would have saved his life. The video had 2 million views and was climbing. At the 6-hour mark, Dr. Whitfield came through the double doors. She was tall, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything but still carried warmth. "You're the girl who came in with him, yes. He's out of surgery, he's stable. The bullet passed through the deltoid and the trapezius. Clean entry, clean exit. We repaired the muscle damage and stopped the internal bleeding. He's going to have significant recovery time, but he'll regain full function of the arm. Can I see him? He's in recovery, he'll be groggy. Hospital policy says family only for the first 12 hours. Dr. Whitfield paused, looked at Wren's blood-stained hands, at the intensity in her face, at the girl who'd been sitting in this waiting room for 6 hours without moving. "Are you family?" "Yes," Wren said, and it wasn't a lie. The recovery room was quiet except for the machines, heart monitor beeping in a steady rhythm. IV drip, clicking softly. The ventilator had been removed, replaced by a nasal cannula that hissed oxygen in a gentle stream. Caleb looked smaller than she remembered. The hospital gown swallowed his frame. His left shoulder was wrapped in white bandages so thick they looked like armor. His face was pale, drawn dark circles under his eyes, made deeper by the fluorescent light. But he was breathing, steady, regular, alive. Wren pulled a chair to his bedside, sat down, took his good hand in both of hers. His fingers were cold. She wrapped her hands around them and held on. She sat like that for 47 minutes before his eyes opened. They opened slowly, unfocused at first, drifting across the ceiling tiles, trying to assemble the pieces of where he was and how he'd gotten there. Then they found Wren's face and locked on. Recognition. Memory. The hallway, the closet, the rifle barrel 6 inches from his nose. "Wren." His voice was sandpaper and gravel. "I'm here." "Tyler, the shooter." "Is he?" "His name was Nolan, and he's dead, self-inflicted, in the admin building after he left us." She paused. 3 people didn't make it. 2 students and a teacher. 7 others were hurt, including you. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "The bullet went clean through your shoulder," Wren continued. "Missed the bone, missed the arteries. Doctor says you'll have full recovery." "Lucky," Caleb whispered. "That's what Dr. Whitfield said. I have a different word for it." He tried to smile, didn't quite make it. "There's something else," Wren said. "The hospital needs to discharge you tomorrow. They need an address. They need a family member, someone to take responsibility for a minor patient." She watched the light go out of his eyes. Watch the walls go up. The same walls she'd seen in the parking lot on Monday when she'd climbed into his car and he'd braced for the questions that would expose everything. I don't have, I know. She squeezed his hand, so I called my dad. Caleb went still, completely still, like a boy who'd learned that unexpected things were usually bad things and was bracing for the impact. He's filing emergency guardianship papers right now. When they discharge you tomorrow, you're coming home with us. Ren, I can't. This isn't a question, Caleb. This isn't me asking. This is me telling you that you ran toward a rifle to save my life, and you are not going back to a car. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together, held still until the tremor passed, steadied herself the way Gunnar had taught her, not with words, with will. My dad doesn't forget when someone protects family, she said, steadier now. And as of today, your family. That's not charity. That's not pity. That's just the truth. Caleb stared at her. His eyes were searching her face for the catch, for the condition, for the part where the kindness turned conditional and the help came with strings. He'd been looking for that catch his entire life, in every foster care offer that fell through, in every teacher who said they'd help and didn't, in every system that promised safety and delivered paperwork. Why, he asked? The same question he'd asked in the parking lot on Monday. The same question he'd been asking his whole life. Because you're one of the good ones, Ren said, and we take care of our own. 2 hours later, the door opened and Gunnar walked in. He filled the entire frame. Leather vest, gray beard, tattooed arms, pale blue eyes. Behind him, the hallway seemed to shrink, like the building itself was making room for a man who took up more space than his body required. He crossed the room and stood at the foot of Caleb's bed, looked at the boy in the hospital gown with the bandaged shoulder and the IV line and the eyes that were too old for 17, looked at him the way he looked at his daughter, thoroughly, completely, seeing everything. Caleb Mercer, my daughter tells me you took a bullet for her. I couldn't let her get hurt. You could have run. The exit was closer. You ran toward danger instead. Yes, sir. Gunnar nodded slowly, that same single dip of his massive head that contained entire conversations. She also tells me you've been living in your car for 8 months, that you've got nobody, no family to discharge you to, no home. Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. That ends today. Gunnar's voice was rough, a voice built by decades of hard miles and harder choices. But underneath the gravel, something else, something that sounded like a door opening. My lawyer is filing the guardianship papers tonight. When they discharge you tomorrow, you come home with us. You eat at our table. You sleep under our roof, non-negotiable. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But first, Gunnar said, and something shifted in his expression. Went softer. Went to a place Ren had only seen twice before. First, my brothers want to meet you. They're coming tomorrow morning. Your brothers? I called in some favors, 3 chapters. California, Nevada, Arizona. He paused. About 300 bikers, give or take. Caleb's face went blank. The information didn't compute. It was too large, too strange, too far outside the boundaries of a life lived in a Honda Civic. 300. Hell's Angels' son. 300 Hell's Angels are riding to this hospital tomorrow morning to pay their respects to the kid who protected one of ours. Caleb looked at Ren. She saw the question in his eyes. Is this real? Is this actually happening? She nodded. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was steady. Why? Caleb whispered. The word he kept coming back to. The word that defined his entire existence. Why would anyone do anything for him? Gunnar leaned forward, put one massive hand on the bed rail. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than Ren had heard it since the night Sawyer died. Because my daughter is alive tonight, because of you. And a man who does that doesn't sleep in a car. Not while I'm breathing. He straightened. That's all the reason I need, son. He turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. The room settled back to the quiet rhythm of machines and breathing. Ren was still holding Caleb's hand. She hadn't let go since he woke up. She wasn't planning to. Your dad just said 300 bikers are coming here tomorrow. Yeah, to see me, to see you. I'm dreaming. This is the painkillers. Get some sleep, Caleb. She settled deeper into the chair, still holding his hand. Tomorrow your whole life changes. He looked at her in the blue-gray light of the hospital room. Monitors beeping, IV clicking. The distant sound of the hospital functioning around them like a living organism. It already changed, he said quietly. Ren's response was immediate. A squeeze of his hand, a look that said more than language could carry. You have no idea. Caleb closed his eyes, and for the first time in 8 months, someone was holding his hand while he slept. Someone had chosen to stay. Someone was sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair at 11 o'clock at night, covered in his blood, wearing borrowed scrubs because her own clothes were evidence, refusing to leave because leaving meant he'd be alone. And alone was the one thing Ren Dalton had decided Caleb Mercer would never be again. Outside the window, the November night pressed cold against the glass. Somewhere in the city, 300 motorcycle engines were being checked and fueled. Somewhere a banner was being painted. Somewhere a leather vest with new stitching was being finished by hands that had been working since the phone call came. And somewhere in a Honda Civic parked in a high school lot now ringed with police tape, an orange tabby cat with a torn ear waited by the driver's side door for a boy who wouldn't be coming back tonight. But who would come back? Eventually. One last time. To say goodbye to the life he'd survived and hello to the one he'd earned. That part of the story was still coming. It was riding through the dark, getting closer with every mile. The sound began at 6:47 in the morning. A rumble so deep and low it didn't register as sound at first. It registered as vibration. The water in the plastic cup on Caleb's bedside table trembled. The heart monitor swayed on its stand. The window glass hummed in its frame like a tuning fork struck by the hand of God. Ren felt it before she heard it. She'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Caleb's bed. Her neck bent at an angle that would punish her for days, her hand still wrapped around his. The vibration pulled her from a dreamless sleep into the gray morning light of the hospital room, and for a moment she didn't understand what was happening. Earthquake, she thought. Then the sound arrived. Not an earthquake. Engines, hundreds of them. A chorus of combustion and chrome that grew louder with every second, filling the air like a storm rolling in from every direction at once. The walls of Mercy General Hospital began to shake. Not structurally, not dangerously, but perceptibly. The way a building shakes when something enormous passes close by. The way the ground trembles when a freight train crosses a bridge. A nurse burst through the door, young, wide-eyed. Her name tag said Beckett, the same nurse who'd brought Ren a blanket the night before. Are you Caleb Mercer? Caleb was awake. The sound had pulled him from a medicated sleep, and his eyes were open but unfocused, trying to assemble the world from pieces that didn't quite fit together. Yes. You need to see this. Ren helped him into the wheelchair. His left arm was immobilized in a sling, the shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages that the night nurse had changed at 4 in the morning. He winced as she settled him into the seat, the movement pulling at stitches and damaged muscle, but he didn't make a sound. He'd spent 8 months training himself not to make sounds when things hurt. She wheeled him to the window. Below them, the hospital parking lot had ceased to exist. In its place was something that looked like a scene from a film that hadn't been made yet. Motorcycles filled every inch of available space. They spilled out of the lot and into the street, blocking traffic in both directions. They lined the sidewalks and the access roads in the ambulance bay. Chrome and black, paint and leather in the morning sun catching every surface and turning it to fire. 300 motorcycles, give or take, and on every single set of handlebars, a photograph. Caleb's face printed from his school ID taped to the chrome with electrical tape. 300 copies of a ball who'd been invisible for 8 months now displayed on the machines of men and women who'd ridden through the night to tell him he would never be invisible again. Caleb stared. His good hand gripped the armrest of the wheelchair so hard his knuckles went white. His jaw was working muscles clenching and releasing, but no words came out. His chest heaved with breaths that couldn't find their rhythm. Ren stood behind him with her hands on the wheelchair handles and watched his reflection in the glass and saw something she'd never seen on his face before. Not gratitude, not shock. Something closer to disbelief, so total it looked like a system error. Like his brain had received information it had no category for and was searching desperately for a place to put it. Ren, his voice was barely audible. Yeah, that's 300 motorcycles. I counted. Why, oh, she leaned down, put her mouth near his ear so he could hear her over the sound of engines that hadn't yet been cut. Because you're one of ours now, and we show up. Gunnar was waiting at the main entrance. Wren had called him at 5:30 that morning from the hospital bathroom, standing in front of the mirror, in borrowed scrubs, staring at her own face and barely recognizing it. She'd told him Caleb was awake, that the doctor said he could go downstairs in a wheelchair, that everything was ready. Everything. The word felt small for what Gunnar had assembled in 16 hours. The banner had been Wren's idea. She'd called Hazel, the woman who ran the screen printing shop next to Gunnar's garage, at 9 o'clock the previous night. Hazel had stayed up until 2 in the morning painting it by hand on a sheet of canvas 12 feet wide. The letters were 3 feet tall, black paint on white canvas, and they read, "Honor Ride for Caleb Mercer." Below the name in smaller letters, a single line, "Courage has no address." Wren had chosen those words herself. She'd sat in the hospital chair at midnight, Caleb sleeping beside her, and typed and deleted and typed again until the sentence felt right. Because address meant two things. It meant the home Caleb didn't have, and the label the world tried to put on people who had nothing. Courage didn't care where you slept. Courage didn't check your zip code. The banner was strung between two motorcycles at the front of the formation. Hazel's brushwork was impeccable. The letters were clean and sharp and visible from 3 blocks away. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and through the glass entrance, Caleb saw them clearly for the first time. Not from above, not through a window, but at ground level. 300 bikers standing at attention beside their machines. Leather vests heavy with patches. Arms crossed or at their sides. Faces weathered by road and sun, and lives that hadn't been gentle. Men with gray beards and young men with fresh tattoos, and women who stood just as tall and just as fierce and just as still, all of them waiting, all of them silent. 300 people who had driven through the dark from 3 states because a girl had made phone calls, and a father had called in debts, and a boy in a hospital bed had done something that none of them could ignore. The automatic door slid open. November air hit Caleb's face, cold and sharp and real. Wren pushed the wheelchair out onto the concrete apron, and every head turned toward them. 600 eyes found the skinny boy in the hospital gown with the sling and the bandages, and the expression of someone who'd woken up in a world he didn't recognize. Gunnar stepped forward. He was wearing his full colors. The leather vest was heavy with patches that represented decades. Road captain, president, years of service. Memorial patches for brothers who hadn't made it home. The hellsangels' death head on the back, embroidered in white thread on black leather, the symbol that meant something different to every person who saw it, but meant only one thing to the people who wore it: family. Gunnar walked toward the wheelchair slowly, each step deliberate, each step carrying the weight of what was about to happen. When he reached Caleb, he stopped, looked down at the boy, studied him with those pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Then Gunnar Dalton, president of the Inland Empire chapter. A man who'd buried a son and lost a wife and built a life from the wreckage of both, got down on one knee. The gesture moved through the crowd like a wave through water. 300 bikers knelt in unison. The sound of leather and denim hitting pavement echoed off the hospital walls like applause from the earth itself. Some placed fists over their higher hearts, some bowed their heads, some did both. All of them knelt for a 17-year-old boy who had slept in a Honda Civic and fed a stray cat his lunch and run toward a rifle because he couldn't leave a girl behind. Caleb's composure broke. The tears came without permission, without warning, without the careful control he'd spent 8 months building in around every vulnerable part of himself. They ran down his face and fell onto the hospital gown, and he didn't wipe them away because his good hand was shaking too badly, and his other arm was in a sling, and there was nothing to do but sit in that wheelchair and let it happen. Wren was crying too, standing behind him, hands on the wheelchair handles, tears cutting tracks through the exhaustion on her face. She didn't try to stop them either. Some moments were too large for composure. Some moments required you to feel everything at full volume. Gunnar's voice carried across the parking lot without effort. A voice built for open spaces and hard truths. Caleb Mercer, you had nothing. The system failed you. Society looked the other way. You survived alone for 8 months, sleeping in a car, invisible to every person who should have seen you and didn't. He paused, let the silence hold. And when the moment came when you could have saved yourself, you chose to save my daughter instead. You put your body between her and a bullet. You held a door shut with your spine while you bled out on a tile floor. Another pause. Longer. Heavy with everything it contained. That's not just courage. That's brotherhood. That's family. And we protect family. Gunnar reached into his vest and pulled out something folded. He shook it open with both hands and the leather unfolded like a flag. A vest. Black and heavy, and clearly made by hands that understood what they were making. On the back, in carefully stitched white letters, two words, honorary brother. Above them, the hellsangels, death head. Below them, Caleb Mercer. We don't give this lightly, Gunnar said. Men ride with us for years and never earn it. But you earned it in 30 seconds of running toward what everyone else ran from. He stood, moved behind the wheelchair, held the vest open. May I? Caleb nodded. His throat had closed completely. Words were beyond him. Gunnar slid the vest carefully over Caleb's right arm, then eased it over his injured left shoulder with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that large. The leather settled onto Caleb's frame and something changed. Not in the vest, in the boy wearing it. His spine straightened, his chin lifted, his eyes cleared. Like the weight of the leather was somehow lighter than the weight of carrying nothing. 300 bikers rose to their feet, and then they roared, not engines, voices. A wall of sound that hit Caleb like a physical force. His name shouted by 300 throats echoing off the hospital walls and the parking structure and the buildings across the street and the key above all of it. Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. One by one they approached. An older man with a gray ponytail that reached his waist and hands scarred from decades of mechanical work. He shook Caleb's good hand with both of his. My grandson was in that school, son. You saved him too. Thank you. A woman with fierce dark eyes and a patch on her vest that said Road Queen. She hugged Caleb gently, her arms avoiding his shoulder with practiced care. My son died in a school shooting 3 years ago in Colorado. Nobody protected him. You protected Ren. You're a real one, baby. A real one. They kept coming, each with a story, each with a handshake or a hug or a nod that carried more weight than any words could. Many left envelopes in Ren's hands because Caleb's arm was in a sling. She collected them without opening them, but she could feel their thickness. Cash, checks, the tangible form of 300 people saying, we see you. A younger biker, maybe 30, with sleeve tattoos and clear eyes that suggested he'd seen the bottom and climbed back up. He leaned down to Caleb's level. I was homeless at your age, brother. Lived under an overpass in Bakersfield for 11 months. Made it out. You will too. He handed Ren an envelope. First and last month's rent. Get yourself set up right. Another. College fund, kid. You're going somewhere. Another. New clothes. You deserve better than 3 shirts. Ren watched the pile grow in her arms. She was doing the math in her head. Envelope after envelope. Dollar after dollar. Life after life, touching the life of a boy who'd thought he was alone. After an hour after every single biker had paid respects, Gunnar raised his hand. Silence fell like a curtain dropping. Instant. Complete. We ride, he shouted. 300 engines roared to life at once. The sound was seismic. It vibrated in Ren's chest cavity, rattled the wheelchair, made the hospital windows sing. Every bike had Caleb's photo on the handlebars. Every rider wore their colors. Every face was pointed forward, toward the road, toward the ride, toward the future that was unfolding for a boy who hadn't had one 24 hours ago. Gunnar helped Caleb onto the back of his motorcycle, a massive black and chrome machine that looked like it had been forged rather than built. Ren mounted her own bike beside them, smaller but just as loud. She'd been riding since she was 14, taught by Gunnar in the empty parking lot behind the shop on Sunday mornings, when the world was quiet and the only sound was the engine and her father's voice saying, lean into the turn. Princess, trust the machine. Hold on with your good arm, Gunnar told Caleb. We're taking you home. They pulled out in formation. 2 long lines with Caleb at the center. 300 motorcycles moving through the streets of the city at a pace that was deliberate, ceremonial, sacred. People on sidewalks stopped and stared. Pulled out phones, filmed. Cars pulled to the curb to let them pass. A woman at a stoplight recognized Caleb from the news, the video, with 12 million views now, and put her hand over her mouth and cried. They rode to an apartment complex on Sycamore Street. A quiet building with clean lines and a courtyard with a fountain that actually worked. Wren had found it. She'd spent 3 hours on the phone the previous afternoon, calling every property management company in the county, explaining the situation, negotiating, leveraging the name Dalton in the one context where it opened doors instead of closing them. The property manager, a woman named Grace who rode a Sportster on weekends and knew Gunner by reputation, waived the deposit and the credit check and the proof of income and said, just bring the boy home. Building C, apartment 2, B, second floor. Corner unit. Windows facing east, which meant morning sun, which meant warmth, which meant a boy who'd spent 8 months shivering in a car would wake up every day with light on his face. Wren dismounted and helped Caleb off Gunner's bike. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a key. Gold-colored. Ordinary. The most extraordinary ordinary object she'd ever held. 1 year paid in full, she said, placing it in his good hand. Fully furnished, close to school, close to the shop where you start work next week. Caleb looked at the key, turned it over in his fingers. His mouth opened and closed and opened again, but nothing came out because language had limits and this moment had exceeded them. Gunner stood behind them, arms crossed, watching. The money the brothers gave you, he said. I counted it this morning while you were getting your discharge papers. $47,000. The number hung in the air like something too heavy to stay aloft. That's your college fund, your emergency fund, your never sleep in a car again fund. They walked him upstairs. Wren unlocked the door. The apartment inside was small but complete. Every detail chosen with intention. A couch in a color that wasn't gray because Caleb had worn enough gray. A kitchen table with 2 chairs because eating alone was over. A bedroom with an actual bed queen-sized with sheets that smelled like fabric softener and pillows that hadn't been flattened by 1,000 nights of use. The closet was full of clothes, jeans, shirts, a winter jacket, boots, all in his size. Wren had guessed on most of it, checked with a nurse on the rest. The refrigerator was stocked. Milk, eggs, bread, lunch meat, fruit, orange juice. The kind of food a person bought when they expected to be somewhere long enough to eat it. On the kitchen table, a note in Gunner's heavy handwriting. This is your home now, son. You're not alone anymore. Sunday dinner's at my house, 5 p.m. Don't be late, Gunner. Below it in smaller writing, a schedule. Therapy appointment. Tuesday, 3 p.m., Dr. Carol Willowbrook Counseling Center. And beneath that, trauma doesn't just go away. We deal with it, Dad. Caleb stood in the center of his apartment and turned in a slow circle. His eyes moved from the walls to the ceiling, to the floor, to the window, where the November sun was pouring in like something being offered. His hand was still closed around the key. His fingers hadn't relaxed since Wren put it in his palm. Wren watched him from the doorway. She'd been watching people for years, reading faces, interpreting silences, translating the language of bodies that couldn't say what they needed to say. But she'd never seen what she was seeing now. A person being rebuilt in real time. A person standing in the first safe space they'd occupied in 8 months and feeling every molecule of it. How do you feel? She asked quietly. Like I'm dreaming. You're not. Gunner's voice from behind her, solid, certain. The voice of a man who'd decided something and would not be moved from it. This is real. You earned it. Not with what you had, but with what you gave. Gunner left first. He hugged Caleb carefully, mindful of the shoulder, and the hug lasted longer than Wren expected. When Gunner pulled back, his eyes were wet, and he turned away quickly because there were things a man like Gunner Dalton did not do in front of people, and crying was one of them. Wren stayed. She sat on the couch while Caleb explored the apartment. Watched him open the closet and stand there looking at the clothes hanging in a neat row. Watched him open the refrigerator and stare at the food inside like it might disappear if he looked away. Watched him sit on the bed and press his hand into the mattress and close his eyes. Wren. Yeah. The bedroom. There's a photo on the nightstand. She went still. She'd put it there herself. Hadn't told Gunner. Hadn't asked permission. Just taken the framed photograph from the shelf in Gunner's living room and placed it on the nightstand in Caleb's new bedroom because she believed he needed to know. Who is he? Caleb asked. He was holding the frame in his good hand. The photograph showed a boy, 16 years old, dark hair, Gunner's blue eyes, a smile that looked like it came easy and often. He was sitting on a motorcycle, 1 foot on the ground, squinting into the sun. That's Sawyer, Wren said. My brother. Caleb looked at her. He died 10 years ago. Motorcycle accident, 16 years old. A pickup truck ran a red light on Route 18 and Sawyer didn't make it. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city moved and hummed. Inside, the silence was the kind that holds weight. Your dad lost a son, and then he lost a wife. My mom left 2 years after Sawyer died. She couldn't carry it anymore. The grief, the life, the club, all of it. She wrote a note and left while I was at school. Caleb set the photograph down carefully, precisely, like it was made of something that could break. Is that why he took me in? Because I remind him of, partly. Ren sat on the edge of the bed beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. When he looked at you in that hospital bed, he saw a boy with no one standing between him and the worst of the world. The same thing Sawyer had no one to protect him from. She paused, chose her next words with care. But that's not the whole reason. The whole reason is that you earned it. Sawyer's death broke something in my dad that 10 years hasn't fixed. I can't fix it either. I've tried. I'm his daughter and I love him. And it's not enough because the shape of what's missing isn't shaped like me. It's shaped like a son. She looked at him directly. I brought you into this family because you saved my life and you deserve a home. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't also do it because I've watched my father carry a wound for 10 years that I can't heal, and I thought maybe if I'm right about who you are, you could. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The photograph of Sawyer faced them both from the nightstand. A boy who'd never grow older than 16 smiling in the sun on a motorcycle frozen in a moment before the red light. That's a lot to put on someone, Caleb said, not angry, just honest. I know, and you don't owe us anything. Not healing, not performance, not gratitude. You just have to show up. Sunday dinners, Tuesday therapy, work at the shop, be here, be alive. That's all. I can do that. Then that's enough. The first week was the hardest. Caleb woke up every night gasping. The dream was always the same. The hallway, the fluorescent lights, the rifle barrel sliding through the crack in the door. Nolan's eye bloodshot and empty staring at him from 6 inches away. The sound of the shot that hit his shoulder sharp and wet, replaying over and over like a record with a scratch that skipped back to the worst moment. He'd sit up in bed drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and for 3 or 4 terrible seconds, he wouldn't know where he was. The darkness of the bedroom looked like the darkness of the janitor's closet. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like the buzz of the fluorescent lights. And then his hand would find the nightstand, and the key would be there, the gold-colored key, and the weight of it in his palm would bring him back. Home, bed, walls, door that locks. Safe. Ren came by every morning. She'd knock twice, always twice, and let herself in with the spare key she'd kept. She'd make coffee in the kitchen while Caleb showered and dressed, and they'd sit at the table and eat breakfast and not talk about the hallway or the closet or the rifle. They talked about everything else. School, which Caleb would return to in a week. The shop where he'd started working afternoons, learning from Gunnar how to strip an engine and read a wiring diagram. The cat Atlas, who Ren had retrieved from the school parking lot and brought to the apartment in a cardboard box with holes punched in the top. Atlas had settled into the apartment like he'd been waiting for an invitation his entire life. He slept on the foot of Caleb's bed, a warm weight against his ankles, and purred through the nightmares like a small engine that ran on loyalty instead of gasoline. Tuesday therapy with Dr. Caro was something Caleb resisted and Ren insisted on. She drove him the first time, sat in the waiting room reading a motorcycle magazine while Caleb sat in a leather chair across from a woman with kind eyes and a notepad and the patience of someone who understood that trust was earned in inches. I don't know what to say, Caleb told Dr. Caro. You don't have to know, you just have to show up. The same words Ren used, the same words Gunnar wrote on the note. Show up. The philosophy of a family that measured commitment not in grand gestures, but in the repetition of small ones. Show up on Tuesday, show up on Sunday, show up at the shop, show up at the table. Keep showing up until showing up becomes the thing that holds you together. The shop was Caleb's anchor. Gunnar put him to work on simple tasks at first, cleaning parts, organizing tools, sweeping the floor. But Caleb's hands were quick and his mind was mechanical, and within 3 days he was helping with actual repairs. Gunnar watched him work with an expression Wren recognized. The same expression he'd worn when he taught Sawyer to change brake pads 15 years ago. Pride tempered by caution, hope guarded by the knowledge of how quickly things could be lost. They didn't talk much while they worked. Gunnar wasn't a man who filled silence with words. But sometimes at the end of the day, when the shop was closed and the last customer's bike was finished and the tools were cleaned and hung back on the pegboard, Gunnar would hand Caleb a soda from the mini fridge, and they'd sit in the open bay and watch the sun go down behind the rooftops. "You're good with your hands," Gunnar said one evening. "My mom taught me. She used to fix everything in our apartment herself. Plumbing, electrical didn't matter. She'd watch a YouTube video and figure it out." It was the first time Caleb had mentioned his mother voluntarily. Gunnar said nothing, just nodded, took a sip of his soda, let the silence hold the weight of the words. "She wasn't always using," Caleb continued. His voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled almost to its breaking point. "She was a good mom for a long time. Then things got hard and she found something that made the hard go away. And the thing that made the hard go away became the hard." Gunnar was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough in a different way than usual. Rougher, like something had scraped the inside of his throat. Sawyer's accident wasn't an accident. Caleb looked at him, and the driver of the truck was drunk. 11 in the morning and he was drunk. They tested him at the scene, .18, more than twice the legal limit. Gunnar stared at the sunset. His jaw was granite. He got 4 years, served 2, was out before the grass on my son's grave had time to settle. The bay was quiet except for the sound of traffic on the street outside. So I understand something about the distance between what should happen and what does happen. Between the system that's supposed to protect people and the reality of living in a world where it doesn't. He looked at Caleb. "That's why I build my own systems. That's why the club exists. Not for the reasons people think. Not for the headlines or the federal investigations or whatever the news says we are. We exist because some of us learned the hard way that the only people you can count on are the people who choose you." He finished his soda, crushed the can in one hand, stood up. "Sunday dinner, 5 o'clock. Wren's making cornbread. Don't be late." Sunday dinner became the axis around which Caleb's new life rotated. Every week, 5 o'clock, Gunnar's house. The dining room table was massive, hand-built from reclaimed barnwood by a biker named Dodge, who did carpentry when he wasn't riding. It sat 12, and every Sunday it was full. Wren cooked with the same intensity she brought to everything else. Ribs that she'd learned from Gunnar cornbread from a recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations of Dalton women and now survived only in Wren's hands because her mother had taken nothing with her when she left except herself. Coleslaw, baked beans, potato salad. The food of people who worked with their hands and ate with appetite. Dottie came, the waitress from the all-night diner where Caleb used to charge his phone and nurse a cup of coffee for 3 hours. She'd seen him 100 times sitting in the corner booth with his textbooks spread across the table, nursing one refill after another, while she pretended not to notice he couldn't afford to order food. She'd recognized him on the news, shown up at the apartment with a casserole dish the size of a suitcase, and declared that every Wednesday she'd bring dinner, and that arguing with Dottie was like arguing with weather. You could protest all you wanted. It was still going to rain. Some of the bikers came too. Rotating cast, different faces each week, but always the same energy. Loud voices and louder laughter and stories that got more outrageous with each telling. They treated Caleb the way they treated each other. Without pity, without performance, without the careful softness that people used when they were handling someone they considered broken. They gave him work and food and a hard time about his haircut and expected him to give it right back. It was at the 3rd Sunday dinner that Caleb said grace for the first time. Gunnar asked. The table went quiet. 12 people, hands linked, heads bowed. Caleb's voice shook at first and then steadied. "Thank you for this food, for this family, for second homes and people who show up when it matters, for being seen when you have been invisible, for homes that aren't buildings, but people who choose you. Amen." "Amen," the table echoed. Wren squeezed his hand under the table. Gunnar raised his glass. "To Caleb, who taught us that courage doesn't ask what you have. It just asks what you're willing to give." Glasses clinked. People ate, the room filled with warmth and noise, and the particular kind of belonging that can't be manufactured or purchased or earned through any means other than showing up and being chosen by people who decide you matter. It was 3 weeks after the shooting on a Tuesday evening when Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from a number he hadn't seen in over a year. Saw the news, saw what you did, saw what happened after. Little bro, I'm proud of you. Mom would be too. Ledger, his older brother, 21 years old and gone since before their mother died, vanished into the kind of silence that could mean anything from prison to death to simply choosing to disappear. Caleb stared at the text for 20 minutes. Atlas purred on his lap. The apartment was warm. The key was on the nightstand. Everything was different, and Ledger's name on his phone screen was a doorway back to everything that had been the same. He called Ren. My brother texted me. Silence on the other end. Then Ledger, the one who disappeared. Yeah. What did he say? Caleb read the message aloud. When he finished, the silence returned. Heavier this time. Full of everything Ren knew about family and loss and the complicated math of loving people who left. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore it. He disappeared. He left me alone with Mom, and then Mom died and he wasn't there. I was 17 and homeless, and he was somewhere else not caring. And the other part remembers that he taught me to ride a bike and how to change a tire, and that he used to read to me when Mom was too high to put me to bed. Ren was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. The voice she used when she was about to say something she'd thought about for a long time. You know what I've learned from watching my dad miss Sawyer for 10 years and my mom disappear without looking back? What? People leave for reasons that don't have anything to do with you, and people come back for reasons that don't have anything to do with you either. The only question that matters is what you do when they're standing at the door. What would you do? I'd open the door, because I've seen what happens when people don't. My mom didn't open the door when my dad tried to reach her after Sawyer died. She walked away and kept walking, and now she's a woman I don't know in a place I've never been. I don't want that for you, Ma. Caleb texted Ledger back that night. Simple. Direct. I got a home now. Come see it. Sunday dinner 5 p.m. I'll send the address. Ledger's response came the next morning. 3 words. I'll be there. Ren told Gunnar. Gunnar said he'd set another place at the table. Didn't ask questions. Didn't hesitate. Just nodded and said the table was built for 12, and they'd only ever filled 11 of the chairs. Sunday arrived. Caleb was nervous in a way he hadn't been since the first dinner. He changed shirts 3 times, which was a luxury he still wasn't accustomed to. Ren came over early to help him prepare. She brought Atlas a new collar blue with a small silver tag engraved with his name and Caleb's address. The address, a physical location in the world that belonged to him. They drove to Gunnar's house together. The driveway was already full of motorcycles. Inside, the table was set. 12 plates, 12 glasses. The smell of ribs and cornbread filling the house like a blanket. At 4:55, a car pulled up that nobody recognized. An old Chevy pickup rust along the wheel well's engine knocking. The driver's door opened and a young man stepped out. 21. Thin in a way that spoke to meals missed and nights spent in places that weren't kind. Caleb's jaw, Caleb's eyes, a different kind of weariness but the same bloodline running underneath it. Ledger Mercer stood in Gunnar Dalton's driveway and looked at the house and the motorcycles and the life his little brother had somehow built from the wreckage of theirs. And his face did something complicated that involved both smiling and falling apart. Caleb met him at the door. They stood there for a moment, 2 brothers separated by years and silence, and the kind of pain that families make for each other without meaning to. You look good, little bro. You look rough. Ledger laughed. It was a short sound, surprised like he'd forgotten laughter was something he could do. Yeah, been a hard couple years. I know. Come inside. There's food. They walked in together. The table made room. Gunnar shook Ledger's hand without comment, without judgment, with the steady grip of a man who understood that people arrived at tables carrying weight you couldn't see, and the only decent thing to do was feed them and let them set it down. Over dinner, Ren watched. She watched Ledger eat like a person who hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months. Watched him listen to the conversation with the careful attention of someone trying to learn the rules of a world he'd never been part of. Watched Caleb glance at his brother every few minutes, checking, confirming, making sure Ledger was still there, still real, still sitting at the table. After dinner, while the others cleared plates and argued about football, Ren found Ledger on the back porch. He was smoking a cigarette and staring at the darkening sky with an expression she recognized. The look of someone who'd been drowning and had just found something solid to stand on, but wasn't sure it would hold. "He talks about you," Ren said, leaning against the porch rail beside him. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not, but he does it anyway." Ledger took a drag, let the smoke out slowly. "I left him. I couldn't handle what was happening with Mom, so I ran. And while I was running, she died and he ended up in a car. Yeah, I should have been there." "Yeah, you should have." He flinched. She didn't soften it. Ren Dalton had learned from a father who believed that the kindest thing you could do for a person was tell them the truth, even when the truth drew blood. "But you're here now," she continued, "and here is where it matters. Caleb's building something, a life, a family. You can be part of it or you can disappear again, but if you disappear again, don't come back. Because he can survive losing you once. I'm not going to let him survive it twice." Ledger looked at her. At this 17-year-old girl in a leather jacket who spoke with the authority of someone 3 times her age and meant every syllable. "You're his sister," Ledger said, "not a question. I'm his family, same thing." "My dad's looking for a second mechanic at the shop," Ren said, turning to go back inside. "The pay's not great, but the work's honest, and there's a couch in the back office where you can stay until you get on your feet, if you want it." "Why would you do that for me?" Ren stopped at the door, turned back. The porch light caught the wings tattooed on her neck and made them look like they were moving. "Because your brother showed me what it looks like when someone decides to save a person they have no reason to save. I figure the least I can do is learn from his example." She went inside. The door closed behind her. Ledger stood on the porch and finished his cigarette and looked at the sky where the first stars were appearing. And when he came back inside, he sat down next to Caleb and said yes. That night, after the bikers had left and Gunnar had said goodnight and Ledger had fallen asleep on the guest room bed that Ren had made up without being asked, Caleb drove to his apartment. He parked in his spot, the spot that was his assigned to apartment 2B a number on a building that appeared on his mail. He walked to the dumpster area behind the building. Atlas was already there waiting. The cat had memorized the schedule. Caleb opened a can of tuna and set it on the pavement and watched Atlas eat. "I got a brother again, buddy," he said quietly, "and a sister, and a date who's not really my dad, but who builds engines and makes ribs and cries when he thinks nobody's looking." Atlas purred and wound around his legs. Caleb picked him up, careful of the torn ear, and carried him upstairs. Unlocked the door with his key, set the cat on the couch, turned on the lights because he could because they were his lights in his apartment and the electricity bill had his name on it. He stood at the window and looked down at the parking lot. The Honda Civic was still there, parked in the guest spot. He'd sell it next week, or donate it. He didn't need it anymore. But tonight he looked at it and remembered every cold night, every morning in the McDonald's bathroom, every moment of invisibility, every time he'd parked in a different spot, and hoped nobody would notice, and nobody would ask, and nobody would see. They saw him now. 300 people had made sure of it. A girl who wore leather-like armor had seen him first, had chosen him, had positioned him where he needed to be, and then caught him when the position cost him blood. A man who'd lost a son had found something in Caleb that he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking. A brother who'd run away had come back because sometimes the door opens from the inside. Caleb's phone buzzed. "Ren, good night, brother," he typed back. "Good night, sister." Her response was immediate. "Sunday, 5 o'clock. Don't be late. Gunner's rules." Caleb set his phone on the nightstand next to the key and the photograph of Sawyer. Atlas jumped onto the bed and curled into a warm circle at his feet. The apartment was quiet in the way that only a home can be quiet. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of fullness, of a space that contains everything it needs. He closed his eyes. The nightmares would come. They always did. The hallway, the door, the eye through the crack. But when he woke up gasping, he would not be in a car. He would be in a bed in a home with a cat on his feet and a key on his nightstand, and people who would answer if he called. Not because the pain was gone, not because the trauma had disappeared, not because anything was fixed, but because for the first time in 17 years, Caleb Mercer was not invisible. 300 people had made sure of that. A girl named Wren had made sure of that first. And in a world that had tried to forget him, that had looked through him, that had failed him at every turn, he'd found the one thing worth more than survival. He'd found the people who chose him. Not the family he was born into, but the family that knelt for him, that showed up, that said, "You're one of ours now," and meant it with every mile they'd ridden through the dark to prove it. Caleb fell asleep thinking about tomorrow, about work at the shop and school and Sunday dinners, and all the tomorrows after that, about Ledger learning to rebuild carburetors, about Wren's cornbread and Gunner's rough voice and Dottie's Wednesday casseroles and Atlas purring at his feet. And for the first time in 8 months, he dreamed not of survival, but of life.